Just a reminder, you can catch me recording this podcast live on AMP. AMP is a new live radio app that lets you call in and chat with me in person while recording. Get the app on Apple's App Store and make sure you follow me at John Middlekauff to get notified when I go live. Okay, before we dive into old Bill Belichick and some other football thoughts, I need to tell you about my friends at Gametime, the official ticketing app of this podcast. Go to your smartphone, download the Gametime app. When you do, and you want to go to a football game, college or pro, you want to go to a concert, you want to go to a comedy show, use the promo code JOHN, promo code JOHN, to get $20 off. They have interactive ticketing maps. You can pick where you want to sit. It factors in the price point for any event, and use the promo code JOHN to get $20 off when you buy your first pair of tickets. Cannot recommend them enough. I've used them for everything. Do it, and do it now. Dive into Belichick. And one take I believed, I don't want to say I throw at the wall, but, part of this business is making predictions, trying to see the future. This one I believed. And I've believed it for years, because back when I lived in the Bay Area, the number one conversation was Mac Jones was going to be a 49er. And I stand by this. I still think that's the craziest thought in the history of the league. It would have been the worst draft pick in the history of the NFL. Not after the fact, but the least talented guy to ever go third overall in the history of the National Football League. Now, he ended up going 15th, which I still think is one of the great overdrafts in the league ever. He's not very athletic. He doesn't have a big arm. And now he's a terrible decision maker. And my thought coming into the season is Mac Jones was going to end the Belichick era. He was going to ruin Bill Belichick's career in New England. And I think that is now taking shape. Now, listen, when I was younger, I was lucky enough, a good friend of mine's grandparents, the guy my dad worked for, be around some very, very successful people that were in their 70s when things started to go the other way. And anyone listening to this that knows someone who's had success or having success and things start going the other way in their later parts of their life, they usually don't become more progressive and more open-minded and more willing to change. I would say the history of those type individuals in men usually become grouchier, grumpier, more closed off, more stubborn. And it usually leads to problems. And I think you're seeing that in Bill Belichick. When I think of some of his other contemporaries, right, older coaches, obviously Pete Carroll is in his 70s. Andy, when I think Pete Carroll and Andy immediately, what do both those guys have that Bill just does not? They have two GMs that they lean on and swear by. Doesn't mean they don't disagree with them sometimes, but they empower people to run their personnel department. Ever since Caserio left, and even when Nick was there, Bill's the boss. Bill's the grand poobah. I've been lucky enough to know a lot of scouts when I worked in the league and since that have been in that building. He ain't listening to any of them. Now, that's not abnormal. I'm not saying Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay listen to everything their scouts say, but he wasn't listening to his personnel people. It's why Belichick historically has had some weird drafts. But when they had Tom, they could always overcome them. Well, he got pretty desperate because once, however the Jimmy G thing played out, he was forced to get rid of him. He didn't. Tom stayed, whatever. He did not have a backup plan. And which is the craziest thing to think about Bill Belichick is during the Brady era, they always had contingencies. And then Brady leaves to Tampa and it was like, we're just going to sign Cam Newton. And then a year later, we're just going to draft McCorkle Jones. And now they are just kind of an average to below franchise. And usually when these things end, think about one of Bill's greatest strengths as an executive, because he was the GM coach, was getting rid of guys early. You'd be like, well, NFL cutthroat, Belichick cutthroat. It's a business. Money doesn't know emotion. Why wouldn't Kraft and that family do it to him? Because I've said this before and I'll say it again. Like, Bill's just not going to voluntarily look at the Krafts and go, you know what? I've given you guys close to 25 years, given you everything I have. It's just not going that well. How about this? You just give me a couple years salary and we'll just go our separate ways. Like I said, anyone who has been around successful, wealthy individuals in their 70s, when shit hits the fan, they're usually not the easiest people to deal with. And we've all, because he has such a public job, followed Bill's career, his mannerisms, the way he interacts. This is not going to be a pretty breakup. But as it's going right now, as they're headed, recording this on Monday, They lost their two best defensive players. Their team was literally, listen, if they're going to compete to make a wild card, they're going to have a top 5 defense. They're going to have to not turn over the ball and just be perfectly coached up. Yesterday, I had forgotten about this just because there was so much football going on. I'm at the gym today. I look up at the TV and they show the highlight of the Cowboys running the 2-point play, the field goal, where they just toss it to 99. He walks right in because clearly the Cowboys know that Belichick brings that heat off the edge and it's going to be a walk-in touchdown or 2-point play. And it was. Like, that's what Belichick used to do to other people. And maybe it's just eventually you lose as many coaches as he has, because a huge thing with Belichick for 20 years was starting guys 20 for 20s, they called them, 20 hours a day, $20,000 pay. From McDaniels to Patricia to Flores to all of his executive candidates. Adam Peters started this way, the Niners number 2, Caserio. They all start this way. What Scott Pioli did once upon a time, Thomas Dimitroff once upon a time in Cleveland. And you know exactly what he's looking for. Well, since they've had so many people leave, those people don't really exist anymore. And now you see a franchise that, let's face it, is kind of lost at sea. Their quarterback situation is a joke. Their skill guys on offense, which he's always struggled to accumulate, especially at wide receiver, are not very good. Is now his defense that does have talent is injured. Let's just call a spade a spade. They're fucked. And they play the Saints this week at home. Then they go to the Raiders, and then they got the Bills, and then at the Dolphins. If he goes 1-3 in those games, it is possible he goes 2-2. But I think the way this team has been, I think they're 3-8 in their last 11 games. Let's say they go 1-3. All of a sudden, they'd be 2-6. What are they going to do? They are much more likely, and I said this the other day, to be a 5-win team than a 9-win team, the squad we're looking at. And Belichick's greatest strength, like I said, was being completely unemotional with football. He looked at players. Obviously, he had relationships with guys, and he cared about certain players. You know, he loved Slater. He, in a weird way, loved Brady. He loved some offensive linemen, but he was always willing to get rid of them or let them walk. Why wouldn't the Crafts do the same to him? Now, this isn't just like firing, like the Giants fired Gabe Kapler, thank God, because the dude's a fraud and a phony. Clearly, Belichick is not that, but it just feels time for a breakup. Like, it's over. And let's face it, all things good, most good things come to an end. And think about, you know, when I was a kid, it was like if you got a divorce, it was like, God, I bet, you know, she cheated on him. You know, is there some violence? Is there something? It was a very taboo thing to say when I was a really little kid. Now that I'm an adult, like half the country gets divorced. I know a ton of people that get divorced, have cordial relationships. They share custody of kids. They like each other. It's just like, we just didn't really get along. It just wasn't working out. We're still friends. Things are going. I'm not saying every divorce is like that. And I don't even think this divorce would be like that because Belichick isn't wired like that. But I think sometimes things just come to an end. And that's how it kind of feels like with Belichick and the Patriots and the Kraft family. If they win 6 games and he won 7 and then he won 6 and they're headed nowhere fast, like I kind of expect Belichick to not be the coach next season. The NFL season is going strong, and DraftKings Sportsbook is hooking up new customers with an offer that's even stronger. Bet $5 on any game this week to score $200 instantly in bonus bets. And DraftKings isn't stopping there. All customers can take advantage of a sweetener offer every game day this October. Get in on the game day greatness. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use the code JOHN, J-O-H-N. New customers can score $200 instantly in bonus bets when you bet 5 on the NFL. That's code JOHN only on DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. The crown is yours. I was thinking about this today, that Vrabel is a good example, and I think DeMeco is the most recent. There's a big question with defensive coaches, right? How do they interact and influence their quarterbacks? And most of them struggle at it, right? They don't know offensive play calling. They are very dependent on whoever they hire as the offensive coordinator. Their role for offense is really just motivation and support and helping with their confidence. But in terms of being able to dial up plays in the middle of the game, in terms of walking into the meeting room throughout the week and helping the quarterback and the offensive coordinator and the quarterback game plan, like that's just not happening. It's just not. But I do think there's a unique thing happening right now. It's happened for a while in Tennessee, and you're seeing it on full display this year. And so many of you guys are like, do not count out the Titans. And you're right. Their coach is too freaking good. Mike Vrabel could play with me, you, and 9 other guys, and we could compete. Why? Because the dude was born to coach. And when you think about it, he's not just your normal defensive guy. This dude was a team captain on Super Bowl teams. He's known as just like one of the higher level guys. And think who his best friend or best friends were on that team. Was the quarterback. DeMeco Ryans, what you're watching him do right now with the Texans, who their young quarterback looks fantastic. I mean, he's shattering records through 4 games. But to me, just the eye test, how calm he is, how explosive he is as a passer. A couple times yesterday, avoiding the rush as a playmaker, which he showed in that playoff game against Georgia. CJ Stroud looks really, really good. I think one of the biggest redo takes I'd like to have is I was all in on Bryce Young. He looks tiny. Like, I don't see it. And the other 2 guys, their talent is, I mean, Anthony Richardson's talent is immense. And CJ Stroud just looks like, at minimum, he's going to be like Kirk Cousins or Dak Prescott. But both those 2 coaches are good examples. DeMeco was like for 8 years in the NFL. I think he was a team captain his rookie season. He was a 2nd-round pick. He was a team captain his rookie season for the Texans. Like, these guys are natural leaders. And not from a coaching standpoint. Like, literally, you put them in the locker room when they were playing, and everyone gravitates toward them. And when you have that ability, I do think your connection with the quarterback can be a little different, despite being a defensive guy, a linebacker by trade. Like, ultimately, DeMeco and Vrabel, their job descriptions as players were to make tackles, not to throw, not to score points, right? It was a defensive mindset. But to me, when you're a team captain, that means, and I see it with the 49ers and Fred Warner, like, he's very close with Brock Purdy. He was one of Brock Purdy's biggest, defenders last year when he made the team, when he started, his biggest proponents, as he just, I mean, he hasn't really struggled, but just had his back from day one. And I think there are certain guys that just get other people, right? Some people just understand people, right? Part of leadership, there's a difference of having the stones and the balls to make tough decisions, and that's hard, right? Belichick trading Logan Mankins or trading Richard Seymour or trading Chandler Jones or making tough decisions. Bill Walsh did it forever. Andy's done it. That's leadership's hard because people are going to look at you funny. People are going to ask you why you do it, why you did that, why you're doing this, why you're not doing that. Like, that's part of leadership. Then there's a huge part of just having the ability to connect with others, right? In a genuine way. And Vrabel has that down as good as I would say any in the NFL. And to me, DeMeco's a natural. Like, you could tell DeMeco, Robert Saleh, I think, has it too. And Robert Saleh was a really, really good head coaching candidate. I think DeMeco is in a different unit. Like, if you had the opportunity to hire the 2 guys, and I'm not just judging because Saleh struggles in New York. I'm just saying DeMeco's only coached 4 games. I watched both of them very closely, been around them, been to their press conferences. To me, it's a no-brainer, DeMeco. So when you watch the Texans, who have a lot of ammunition, right, to improve their team, and really a couple years ago when they hired David Culley, it was so ugly and such a disaster, no one would take that job. So they basically hired a guy to fire the guy. Last year, didn't quite understand, but ultimately, who cares? It led them to DeMeco Ryans. And now they got a quarterback. Pretty sure they still have another pick coming from Cleveland who, you saw Deshaun's already banged up. Now Myles Garrett's in a boot. Now they're in a bye, so we'll see how their injuries play out. But their next game's against the 49ers. I think the Texans got themselves pretty special. Now, are they good enough to make the playoffs this year? We still got a long way to go. I would say you would kind of bet on the Titans, just they're farther along in their development, just be scrappier when they played. Obviously, the Jags have kind of got or can get their offense together and in theory should be more explosive than the Texans. But I don't think you can just count the Texans out. Like, is it inconceivable they could win the division? We've seen crazier. These teams aren't good enough. The Jags aren't good enough clearly to run away with it. The Titans just could lose to anyone just like they can beat anyone. So what you're seeing out of the Texans is kind of what you saw exactly out of the Titans forever with Vrabel. Is like, how are they doing this? Well, they're doing it because their coach is a fucking stud. The dude was born to lead a group of men in football pads. whether he was literally in the pads with them coming out of the tunnel, or he's in a pair of joggers, a collared shirt, and has a whistle around his neck leading him out of the tunnel. And that's what's cool about this sport. And we've seen a lot more recently, some of these guys go into coaching. And I think the AFC South has two just defensive guys that are just in it to win it for a long time. For a limited time, Verizon customers can get Netflix and NFL Plus for just $25 a month with Plus Play. That's $120 in annual savings. Plus Play is a platform where Verizon customers can shop, manage, and save on the subscriptions you already love, like Netflix and NFL Plus. With NFL Plus Premium, you get access to live games on mobile, NFL Red Zone, NFL Network, and more. Just go to Verizon.com/plusplay to bundle and save on Netflix and NFL Plus today for a limited time only. One thing I wanted to hit on really quick was some stuff from college football from the weekend. Watched a decent amount of college football, and like most people, I've watched Colorado. I think 4 out of their 5 games. The only game I missed was a Colorado State game. But I was intently going to watch the USC game because my number one thought going into that game was, this is a big moment for Lincoln Riley, kind of to have a muscle flex, kind of to go, hey, guys, it's clear I got a quarterback and an offense. I can score on anybody. But my defense, we just saw Oregon do it. Now, I know that was at home, but we're going to shove these guys around. We're a playoff contender. We're a national championship contender. We're tough. I've said it forever. And the only reason I know it, because I've seen it up close and personal. You can't fake being tough. When I was around, and anyone that played the Fresno State teams, anyone that played for Pat Hill, he's a tough guy. So he knew what other tough guys look like. He knew when he was recruiting what a tough guy was, because that was him. Former offensive lineman. He resonated with other tough guys. It's why he was friends with the Ozzie Newsomes, the Bill Belichicks, the Andy Reids. They saw football from a similar lens. You can't fake that. It's why my issue with Chip Kelly is, and this goes to Ryan Day too, who's learned from Chip Kelly, is like their mode and their thoughts and their philosophical beliefs on the sport are just different from true tough guys, right? It doesn't mean they can't win. We've seen Chip win a lot in his Oregon days. We've seen Ryan Day win a lot. Now he benefits from being at Ohio State, but let's just call a spade a spade. The toughest guy in that conference is not Ryan Day. It's Jim Harbaugh. Why? Because Jim Harbaugh doesn't have to fake it. He's just a tough SOB. And Ryan Day is just an offensive-minded, great mind. Can score points, can recruit that position. But when I look at Ryan Day, do I think tough guy? Hell no. Listen, I've always thought the guy was kind of a phony and a fraud. But you can't dispute when you watch Urban Meyer's team played, they could play in the parking lot or they could play in front of 100,000 people. They're going to hit you in the mouth, just like Harbaugh's doing, just like Saban did forever, just like Kirby did forever. Ultimately, what Lincoln Riley is, he comes from Mike Leach. I love Mike Leach. R.I.P. One of my favorite coaches of my entire life. But Mike Leach was a score points, play no defense. Now, because Lincoln Riley's at Oklahoma and USC, he's recruiting and transfer portaling and buying different level players than you did at Texas Tech and Washington State. But he thinks like Mike Leach. And when you watch his team, they're just soft as puppy shit. I mean, they are just a team that is not built to win a national championship. And it starts with their head coach, because the way he views football through the lens of his football mind is points, is offensive players. I lived through being in college, and my cousin played at Fresno State when they played the peak of those USC teams. Well, why were they built from such a physical standpoint? Because Pete Carroll is at his core a defensive-minded guy. So what does Pete Carroll like? Sweet guys on defense that will knock you out in a run game. So USC, what they hung their hat on was Malugas, the Cushings, all the defensive linemen, the big DBs, and a powerful offensive line with a running game. When you watch Lincoln, like, he wants to just sling it all around the yard, which is fun. and it's enjoyable. It's not going to win him a national championship. I don't think there's any chance with his defense they can win the Pac-12. I thought this more and more every time I watch them play. Their quarterback is very, very talented, and more than likely he's going to be the number 1 overall pick. But, like, he's not good enough. I had a buddy last year that was at their bowl game. I think they played Tulane. Remember, they were like the highest ranked non-Power 5 team, and they lost. Why? Caleb was incredible. I remember getting texts from the buddy. It was like, God, this guy's arm in person is outrageous. But the problem is their defense couldn't stop a nosebleed. So I watch USC, fun team, but frauds because they play no defense. And the only person to blame is the head coach. Because in college, the head coach is also the GM and sets the tone for the operation. And I watch USC and I just see a soft team. That's not Caleb's fault. That's not the wide receiver's fault. It's the head coach's fault. Because it starts and ends with defense if you want to win a national championship. I think easily the most disappointing team so far of college football has to be Brian Kelly and LSU. And I was glued to that game. I was going furniture shopping. I found a TV to watch it while Maria shopped all around the store, and I watched about the first half. And we got home, got some in and out, watched the second half. It was a fun game to watch. But you don't pay a guy $90 million and $10 million a year at LSU. It's one thing to lose to Florida State, neutral site game when they're a national title contender. It's another thing, and they beat Alabama, but like you can lose to Alabama. You can lose to Georgia. Under no circumstances can you lose to Mississippi. That will not be tolerated with LSU. Now, I'm not saying he's going to get fired or whatever, but that's the type loss. For as awesome as last year was, right? Upsetting Alabama, getting to the SEC championship game. It was a really good starting year after kind of the weird offseason of bungling the it's family. You know, he can't even say it. Being 3-2 is one thing. It's another thing to lose the divisional game. You can't lose to Lane Kiffin, right? Because they're thinking, why wouldn't we just hire Lane Kiffin then? And that's one of those things that it's hard to shake. And I think it's much more difficult. Like one of their great advantages always was, well, you're just going to have more talent at LSU. Well, in theory, you will. But that guy now can always transfer. So at any moment, these guys can leave. Well, before, even if I inherited a team that was struggling, I was going to get guys that might be struggling just because they're not playing well. They're not getting coached right. The talent's going to be there. Now the influx, people leaving, it might be a little more difficult than even he planned, right? And it's going to be fascinating to watch because clearly this year they can't make the playoffs. But, man, lose to Ole Miss. And in that fashion, it's one thing to lose 24-21, last-second field goal. They're celebrating Eli Manning's 03 team. Patrick Willis is in the house. It's a really big moment. I think they said on the broadcast, biggest crowd in the history of the program, like 70,000 people. It's another thing to lose and give up like 78 points. I mean, they could not stop them. You're LSU. You're LSU. You should have NFL players at every level of your defense and multiple sweet pass rushers, awesome linebackers. I mean, you're a school of elite DBs. When I think LSU, one of the first things I think about is defensive backs. And you're just getting smoked like that. So that's a really, really bad loss. Another thing, sometimes, if I'm having a cocktail or two, I'll fire off some tweets that I might regret. And I'm watching the Duke North Carolina game, the Duke Notre Dame game. And Riley Leonard's running around. I'm like, this guy might be the third best quarterback in this draft. Caleb, Drake May, Riley Leonard. And then I start texting around just to, double check my work. And I got people like he's a really good prospect. He's huge, former basketball player, really athletic, not a great arm. So his comp's probably more Daniel Jones. Now, Daniel Jones did go sixth, but he has a devastating injury at the end. That game was really fun. And Sam Hartman, who a couple buddies coming into this league told me that they had like third day grades on him. And then clearly we've talked about this through the first couple weeks. His stats were crazy. Got humbled a little bit in the Ohio State game. He made some plays down the stretch. Now it's Duke. They're not, the Coach K Duke football program. They're clearly a lot better. They're a high-level operation, probably an 8-9 win team. If their quarterback, I haven't seen the latest, maybe shattered his knee. But if he had been healthy, they're going to win a lot of games. It was an impressive win. I thought Sam Hartman showed some grit, some toughness. He made a run to extend the game on 4th and 15. Is he an NFL starter? I was open to it through the first couple games, watching him a little closely. He's probably more likely to be a backup, and he's probably more likely to be a 4th, 5th round pick, which there's nothing wrong with that, right? Nothing wrong with that at all. But that was a very, very fun game to watch. Okay, one thing I want to dive in before we get out of here. It's time for this week's game. I thought might give almost anything to redo the game, brought to you by Uber Eats. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about a game that almost went in the way of the gamblers, because there were multiple times this weekend where if you took the team with an enormous spread, you were feeling pretty good. The Kansas City Chiefs were minus 8.5, and Patrick Mahomes was walking into the end zone at the end of the game. And it would have made it a 10-point game, and you would have covered easily. Who was taking the Jets plus 8.5 was Zach Wilson. So I didn't bet the game, but if I would have, I definitely would have taken Kansas City. And then Patrick Mahomes is running. He's going to walk into the end zone. Here's the problem. Patrick Mahomes is too well coached. He knows situational football too well. And he doesn't care about the line. He doesn't care about the gambling line. So he just hits the ground, and the Jets cover. But to me, if you were almost, and I would have, if I bet this game, would have taken Arizona plus 14, the Niners are winning by 3 scores. Arizona has the ball with like under 10 seconds left. Dobbs hits Zach Ertz, one of the better receiving tight ends of the last decade. Right, they're in, probably the 20-yard line. Hit Ertz at like the 5. He walks into the end zone. The problem, the ball goes right through his hands. He drops the ball. Now, they still got one more play. Dobbs drops back, hits a wide receiver in the corner of the end zone, again in his hands, and the ball goes right through his hands. These are 2 of the worst gambling losses, if you had the Chiefs or you had the Cardinals, I can ever remember. I mean, literally, walk-in touchdown, 2 other touchdowns, Mahomes on the ground, 2 other balls on the ground. You cannot make it up, but it's why we love football. That's this week's almost anything game of the week. We'll go with the Cardinals. And you can order your almost anything with Uber Eats, the official on-demand partner of the NFL. Order now.